Hey, Imogene.
Hey, how's it going, Joe?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing? What hour are you on?
I, I mean, time flies when you're having fun. So hour 12 feels like nothing. It's
Perfect.
yeah, we're just rolling right along. We've had just just a crazy day. We've run the gamut. We've had people tuning in from I think 80 different countries at last count. We've had speakers from different countries around the world. We've tackled so many different ecosystems, animals and fungi and lichen and everything under the sun. So it's been a blast so far.
That is awesome. Yeah, I'm super glad to be here and be part of it.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you take over shortly, but I feel I just can't do that without giving you an introduction. So here we go. We have Imogene Cancellare joining us. She is a conservation biologist and National Geographic Explorer who conducts research on rare and elusive wildlife. Her background is in landscape and conservation genetics, population ecology, and wildlife management, primarily with carnivores and amphibians. But her current research is focusing on one of the most elusive creatures of them all, the snow leopards of across high Asia. So again, Imogene, it's so great to have you joining us this evening. It's kind of like getting close to almost like an after hours biofest that we have going on here.
Well, that's super awesome. Yeah, I know. I'm really excited. I can talk about snow leopards any time of the day. I guess maybe it's the beginning of the day in certain parts of the world. So
That's true.
it feels always like a good day for me when I'm talking about snow leopards, though. So whenever I'm good to go, I will start. I don't want to take away my face too soon, but if we're ready, I will dive right in.
All right. Well, I do want to, because you mentioned that, I'm going to bring it up, and because I can check analytics on the website quickly and see a few of the spots that are joining us right now.
Oh, nice.
United States, Mexico, Australia, Singapore. So we've got a global group hanging out with us right now.
Well, that's awesome. And thank you guys so much for tuning in and hanging out. And Joe, of course, thanks for having me. I always love chatting with people about conservation and the work that I and other people are doing. Let's see, assuming that you can see the screen. Hold on one second. Does that show up for you, Joe?
It is full screen. It looks good.
Perfect. All right. Well, I will dive right in. All right, everybody. Well, Joe gave me a great introduction, but just to recap, my name is Imogene Cancellare. I am a conservation biologist and landscape geneticist. I am currently coming to you from the East Coast in the US. I am in Newark, Delaware, where I am conducting my graduate research at the University of Delaware, and I am focusing on the species that you see in front of you, which is the beautiful and charismatic snow leopard, which is shot on camera trap by a wonderful photographer. His name is listed below. I'm going to be talking a little bit about my two favorite topics in the entire world. Yes, they are both related. Yes, they could be the same. I'm here to talk about carnivore conservation in the context of the research that I do, and then also give you a little bit of an overview about the research that I am doing through the University of Delaware, but it is also generously funded by an organization called Panthera, as well as National Geographic. And so to dive right in, I will begin first by identifying what exactly is a carnivore. And so a carnivore, I'm going to use as a loose term. A carnivore is a meat-eating animal. It's an organism that primarily consumes the tissue of other animals. There are species that can be obligate carnivores, meaning they can only eat meat. That would include things like the snow leopard or your domestic cat. And then there are other species that consume varying amounts of animal tissue, and they would be considered omnivores. And so you might think of something like your domestic dog or a wolf. But I'm going to go ahead and use the term carnivore to cover any species that consumes a significant portion of meat or other animal tissue in their diet. And the cool thing about that designation is that regardless of their size and regardless of where they are in the world, carnivores are everywhere. And so they can be in terrestrial systems, they can be in aquatic systems, they can fly, they can swim, they can live in the high mountains of Central Asia, they can live in urban ecosystems, they can live in very, very tiny ecosystems. They sometimes might be scary. They could also be very charismatic, and they can also be very common. And so the reality is, regardless of where they are in the world, carnivores all have one thing in common. Yes, I would go ahead and say that everything on this screen is cute, but if you don't like spiders, I won't hold that against you. Carnivores can be furry, they can be feathered, they can be scaly, but they do share one thing in common, and that is that carnivores help structure ecosystems. So briefly, what do I mean by that? Well, as a couple examples, this is a photograph of a bobcat, which is a medium-sized carnivore that is endemic to a large portion of North America. And so this species is very important in its landscape, given that it helps control small mammal populations. However, this species is also directly related to the presence and density of other carnivore species. For example, another carnivore that's native endemic to this part, or to parts of North America, which is called the coyote. It's a canid, it's a dog-like carnivore. And in several different ecosystems, when coyotes are removed from the ecosystem, bobcats and other small carnivores like foxes become more plentiful on the landscape. And that helps change the structure of small mammals or prey items. And in a lot of cases, it even eliminates prey items which might feed other species like owls or other birds of prey or other competing carnivores. Another example of a carnivore being important in the structure of ecosystems, this is an animal that you might find in Australia. This is called the dingo, and the dingo helps control the eradication of other small mammal or prey species that are depleted in the presence of the invasive red fox and the invasive domestic cat. So when they are on the landscape, they help control other predators from over harvesting or exploiting other species. And then another great example is the very adorable sea otter. There's been a lot of really cool research done on these guys that's shown that when they are absent from an ecosystem, one of their prey items, sea urchins, their population numbers completely explode, and they predate on kelp forests. And as a result, they completely eliminate the kelp forests. And without the sea otters, kelp forests, these marine forests completely disappear. And so the reality is we can find these examples all across the world. And carnivores help structure ecosystem in a variety of different ways, because specifically their relationship with other species on the landscape helps structure the health and the density of those species, specifically so that no one specific species is going to grow exponentially and destroy the quality of the landscape. And so a great example of that, this is kind of the charismatic example of the importance of carnivores and why they merit conservation, or they have conservation value. A great example is the Yellowstone ecosystems. That's a national park in the Western United States. And so wolves, gray wolves, were extirpated or eliminated from Yellowstone for 70 years. And so the entire Yellowstone ecosystem did not have wolves from the period of 1926 to 1995. And when these apex carnivores, or these top predators, were gone from the landscape, the animals they would normally eat, like elk and deer, their populations completely exploded because there was nothing to control them. And so as a result, elk overbrowsed all of the vegetation on the landscape. And so that includes things like willows, cottonwoods, aspen trees. And in the winter, basically the browse level was completely raised as a result because of all of these different ungulate species eating the vegetation. And so when they were gone, basically when coyotes were gone, their populations climbed, the elk populations climbed and climbed, but then they ran out of food because they grazed the vegetation. And so eventually their populations would crash. In the absence of carnivores, smaller carnivores were able to populate the landscape, like coyotes, which I mentioned earlier. And so even though they can kill elk and they can kill deer, they mainly prey on smaller mammals that are more appropriate to their size, like squirrels and voles. And so that reduced food available for other carnivores like foxes or badgers or raptors. And so in 1995, wolves were brought back into Yellowstone because they are a natural part of the environment. They play a key role in structuring the ecosystems. And when the wolves returned, the entire landscape changed. Elk populations were reduced by half. And this is important from a conservation perspective because they were reduced below carrying capacity, or the ability for a landscape to sustain healthy populations. Trees and vegetation came back in healthy numbers, which provided habitat for a myriad of other different species like ravens or frogs or even beavers. Other predators returned in higher numbers, and overall the entire ecosystem was more healthy. And so this is a great photo that represents that. This is just after 10 years of wolves being on the landscape. The top photo A, is right when wolves were introduced, and the bottom photo B is after wolves had been there for just over 10 years. And I don't know about you, but realistically, I think the bottom photo looks a lot better for a variety of different species. And so what this means taken together is that carnivores are important because if they are on the landscape, they help protect the health of other species. If we have enough habitat and enough landscapes to protect carnivores like wolves or bears or tigers or lions, then realistically, we're also protecting or creating habitat for a variety of other species. And we call species like this umbrella species, meaning that if we have enough habitat for a tiger, we're probably going to have enough habitat for other smaller species, which helps keep the entire ecosystem in balance. And so there are several different ways that scientists can study carnivores. And these are the reasons that I mentioned are why they are important for conservation. And the reality is, whether it is handling wildlife or going out into the field and collecting biological data or bringing it into the lab or using a variety of different technological methods, scientists can use so many different disciplines to study specific questions about carnivore populations. Because ultimately, the goal of a wildlife biologist is to manage populations. And so the maintenance of biodiversity is contingent on making sure populations of many species are able to persist into the future. And so, of course, that brings me to what I'm going to talk a little bit about for the rest of this seminar today, which is the study species, my current study species, which is the snow leopard. My dissertation focuses on the range-wide questions about this great cat. And so to orient you into where that is in the world, this is a map of part of Central Asia. The orange that you're seeing is the current range of the snow leopard. So this orange polygon right here represents the mountain ranges that snow leopards live in. And so this comprises 2 billion square kilometers of high elevation arid habitat. And so I work with an organization whose goal is to help protect this animal. And that organization is called Panthera. And their snow leopard program, the goal or the vision of this program is to help stabilize and recover snow leopard populations, because snow leopards are uniquely important to these mountain ecosystems. They help protect several different wildlife species, but also snow leopards are inextricably linked to human health, because snow leopard habitat, all of those beautiful mountain ranges that I showed in that orange graph on the previous slide, comprises of water that provides fresh water for 1/3 of the world's human population. So protecting snow leopards is not only about the cats themselves, but about other wildlife and also about people. And so this is where snow leopards live. They live in these beautiful high elevation mountain ranges. So in the top right, that's a photo that I took in China. In the bottom left, that's a photo that I took in Kyrgyzstan. These are both during the summer. You can see that they are high in elevation, they are rugged, they are very remote, and it's sparsely vegetated. And that's because snow leopards are habitat specialists. They're called snow leopards because they thrive in a snowy environment, and their prey species also live in this part of the world. But despite the fact that they're beautiful, the fact that they live in an environment like this and the fact that they are rare and elusive means there is a lot that we don't know about these animals. And knowledge is power when it comes to conservation, and questions about natural history and ecology and behavior and how populations are connected and what their numbers might be helps maintain the health of populations, which goes into all of the reasons why carnivore conservation is incredibly important. And so, like I said, when you compare the knowledge that we have about snow leopards compared to several other species, we have a huge gap in several different disciplines like evolutionary history and population ecology and natural behavior. And like I said, scientists can use a lot of different methods. And so this is a camera trap photo. It's a remotely triggered photograph. There is no one present for this video. It's a camera that's motion censored, and a snow leopard and her 2 cubs came up to sniff the edge of this cliff to check it out. And so scientists that work in my lab, the Rare and Elusive Species Lab at the University of Delaware, are able to document these cats and different habitats that they live in. But because there's so much that we don't know, this type of research is critically important. But because snow leopards are really rare and it's hard to access them, it's often hard to find them. And so we have to come up with methods that are able to address the importance of carnivore conservation while also accounting for some of the issues with being able to detect them in the field. And so my research comprises a little bit of field work as well as lab work. I'm really interested in trying to use non-invasive technology, or technology that doesn't require me to come into contact with the animal, to address conservation questions like, where are snow leopard populations? How many are there? And what does that mean in the context of allocating money for conservation or having different organizations work together, and just adding to the growing body of knowledge that helps us better understand a species and how we can address conservation questions in a changing landscape. And so the way that I combine fieldwork and lab work is very simple. I use cat poop. And so I say all these big fancy words about the type of work that I do, but realistically, I am a poop scientist at heart. My job is to go out into the field, like you see on the left, and I look for fecal material that is left behind by snow leopards. And if you know a little bit about snow leopard ecology and how they behave, it's kind of easy to find snow leopard poop. Granted, I might not see snow leopards very often, but I can find their fecal material because in the previous video, you saw snow leopards sniffing the edge of a cliff. Realistically, this is characteristic snow leopard behavior. And so if you know where snow leopards might go to check their territory limits, you can find fecal material. And so my job, like I said, is to collect that fecal material and then I bring it into the laboratory because I'm interested in genetic data. And so what I do is I extract DNA out of the fecal material, and I'm extracting DNA from the snow leopard, and I'm amplifying that on species-specific markers. So I'm only amplifying the DNA of the snow leopard, not any of its prey items. And so once I get that raw data, the genetic data, then I can start answering the questions that I mentioned, which is, how many snow leopard populations are there? How genetically similar are they? What are some of the environmental variables that might help structure their movement or impact how they are structured on these different landscapes? And what does that mean for conservation? And what does that mean for the future? And so there's a little bit of snow leopard poop in that photo. And so realistically, like I said, I work in the field first, and I work it's a hugely collaborative project with Panthera. I work with several different researchers in several different countries, as well as local indigenous communities to find this scat based on where snow leopards have been seen or where their prey items have been seen. And then I put that data into test tubes, and then I bring it back into the lab to answer some of those questions. And so even though I don't see snow leopards very often, I have been fortunate to see snow leopards a few times. This is a video that was taken in China. I think it's definitely one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. This is a beautiful July afternoon. This is on the side of a mountain. I spotted this female charging down this flower-covered mountain because she was trying to hunt a marmot, which is a large-bodied rodent, and she was unsuccessful. And so where she was just sitting was on top of the marmot's burrow, and she's flicking her tail because she's irritated. And right here, she is turning around and she is looking right at us, and she's still resting because it's hot. And even though that she knew that we were there, she wasn't afraid of us. And that's because in this part of the world, snow leopards are really important to the religion and the culture in different countries in Central Asia. And in the Buddhist faith, tolerance of wildlife is really important. And so one of the things that is really critical for carnivore conservation is tolerance of carnivore species. And so in the United States, we often don't see this level of tolerance for carnivores. And in kind, we don't see carnivores being willing to share space with us, even for those short and beautiful moments. And that's because there's a lot of different threats that are common to carnivores, like habitat loss and fragmentation, loss of prey, and direct killing. And whether it's a snow leopard or something that's in your backyard, these are all issues that we have to simultaneously account for as we learn more about them in order to conserve their populations. And the reality of this is, like I said, tolerance of carnivores is incredibly important, because even though they have intrinsic value in a landscape, they also protect several other species. And in some cases, like the snow leopard, they are also very closely linked to our health as well. But regardless of where they are in the world, my interest is making sure that not only their populations, but populations of several other wildlife species are able to persist into the future. And so with that, if you have any questions, I would love to chat with you about them. These are the organizations that I work with for my research, and that's where you can find me online. But with that, while we still have a few moments, I'd love to chat with you about carnivore conservation and snow leopards.
All right. Excellent, Imogene. Thank you so much for that awesome presentation. And oh my goodness, being able to see a snow leopard in the wild, that's, you should count yourself in one of the lucky few to be able to say something like that. That's pretty
It was
cool.
a real treat.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad you brought up that Yellowstone example. I think that is such a good example of how removing a keystone species like the wolf can just completely change the entire ecosystem, and then to see it come back like that. But I had a question about what was kind of natural in an ecosystem. Is it kind of like a natural flow to have the prey numbers rising, and then that makes the predators rise kind of a little bit behind, whereas then when there's too many predators, prey falls? Is there kind of a pattern where they're just kind of always just off from each other a little bit?
Yeah, there actually is a statistical model called the Lotka-Volterra model. And so you can pop it into Google and you basically see a graph that exemplifies what you just said, which is this ebb and flow of carnivore and prey items. And so realistically, prey items are always going to exist, like prey species. So thinking like deer or different bird species, things that don't eat meat, things that get eaten, are going to exist at higher densities because in their biological system, they have to account for being eaten while also trying to be successful. And so predators then are going to be prey limited. In order for a predator population to be successful, you have to have a stable number of prey items. And so realistically, as prey items go up, carnivore populations go up as well, and then they start to predate a lot, and then they both start to go down, and they basically kind of go up and down like this little roller coaster system in the absence of other things like human threats or climate change.
All right. So we got a couple questions here in the Slido room. So we'll start off with one from Ed. In the ecosystem, in those higher elevations, are the snow leopards the keystone species, or do they share that role with any other carnivores?
Yeah, I would definitely say that they share that role with other carnivores throughout their entire range. So snow leopards share habitat with common leopards. They share it with brown bears. They share it with wolves. They also share habitat with mesocarnivores like lynx, as well as Pallas cats. And then there are other Tibetan foxes as well. And so all of those, to varying degrees, could be considered keystone species. I would say some of the larger carnivores probably play a more heightened role than the medium-sized carnivores.
All right. So Alex is wondering about maybe your observations or observations of others. Do we know what's happening with the snow leopard population? Is it safe to say it's declining right now? What do we know?
Overall, they are considered to be declining. So in 2016, they were uplisted from endangered to vulnerable. And that's based on having increased knowledge about their adult population numbers that are contributing to the next generation. So that's adults that are reproducing from year to year throughout their range. And now realistically, it seems like they might be declining. They could be stable in some areas, but there is one of the things that we don't know about snow leopards is sampling populations throughout their entire range. So in some areas that might be totally correct. In other areas, maybe we'll find soon that fortunately we're not right and they are doing well.
All right. So the snow leopards, what are some of the pressures they're facing right now?
So snow leopards since they're habitat specialists, some of their some habitat mediated changes can be critically important to them. Central Asia is actually warming a little bit faster than the rest of the world. And that creates a unique problem for a cat that already lives at what we call the roof of the world. So if you live at the top of the mountain, where exactly else can you go? So granted, their habitat will shift a little bit, but as they're dealing with that, they're also dealing with increased fragmentation from infrastructure or mineral development throughout their range. They're dealing with an issue of natural prey loss and increasing human wildlife conflict. And all of those work together to lower their populations, in addition to things like persecution killing as a result of when they come into contact with livestock.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking, about the people who live with snow leopards and run into those kind of issues with the livestock, is that kind of a general feeling of the people in that area that they're not big fans of, or do they realize that this is something special that lives in their area? They're just trying to find a way to manage the situation.
Right. And so the reality is that the culture and the politics and the religion is as diverse as the ecosystems that snow leopards live in. Fortunately, there are a lot of places in which people, either as a result of understanding coexistence or through faith or just through simple tolerance, understand that they share space with snow leopards. But it's not just because you understand doesn't mean you can make a living if you're in a low income community and you lose an animal to a livestock you lose livestock to a snow leopard. So there are lots of programs that focus on community-based conservation, which is ensuring livestock protection, either through building corrals or creating insurance programs that basically return the financial loss. And then also creating responsible ethical ecotours that basically roll in community subsistence with the protection of snow leopards, which is really, really cool. Because realistically, conservation is great and all these things, matter in the context of ecology, but really conservation is also about people. And so we have to take care of the unique issues for unique communities that live alongside wildlife.
All right. Got another good question here about how successful they are hunting. So it's obviously a fairly complex environment, especially higher up in those ranges. How often are they successful in a hunt? 1 out of 4? What's it like for them?
So I've heard the statistics that for most carnivores, they are successful an average of like 10% of the time. And so when I was in China, I saw 4 snow leopards. The female that I just showed you the video of, we did see her twice, and we saw her hunting both times, and she was not successful either time. And so the reality is, particularly for females that are trying to take care of cubs, they're hunting around the clock because they have such low success. I think the reality is these cats are often tired and they're often hungry, like most carnivores.
Yep. Okay, one more question here in the Slido, and this is about your choice to study. Why did you choose University of Delaware to study conservation biology?
Yeah, so the University of Delaware is an awesome school. I'm really fortunate to work with a really great advisor and really great committee members. And the reality is that's was incredibly important to that process for me. Realistically, when it comes to grad school, you obviously want to take care of the individuals that you're working, or you want to be mindful of the individuals that you're working with. But for me, it was a combination of having great mentors that are willing to work with me and alongside me and teach me, but also having a really interesting project that allows me to develop my skills. So when my current advisor asked me if I was interested, yes, I was interested because I'm interested in genetics and carnivores, but I also was interested in working with good people. And so for me, it's the best of both worlds. It's a great program, great people, and a great study system.
All right.
Even though there are no snow leopards in Delaware.
Yes, I had a feeling, but I'm glad it's confirmed now, 100%. No snow leopards to be found. Very cool. Well, I think a great question to end us off on today is advice. Advice for that young explorer, that young scientist, that young conservationist who might be thinking about a career in that field. What's a piece of advice you'd give them?
The first thing that I would say is that yes, that it's going to be hard, and yes, it's going to require a lot of labor. But the reality is, if you work smart, not harder, you can be successful. I always like to tell people that are interested in being a wildlife biologist or doing conservation research that it's not just about the species. So I'm doing my dream job. I've really always wanted to work in carnivores, and working with snow leopards is obviously a dream. However, the reality is I'm only able to do this work because I have a skill set that is specific to addressing a conservation concern or need. And so prior to doing this, I worked on several different carnivore species. Yes, I've worked with salamanders, but my interest is in genetics. And so I can use genetic tools for any different species as long as they have DNA. And so developing a skill set that can usefully address a conservation question you have for a species that you're interested in is the best way versus I love dolphins, and then taking it from there. It's kind of like flip the idea on its head and work towards the goal of getting to what you want, and you're more likely to be successful, but also more likely to be really useful, not just for that species, but for so many species, because there are a lot of really cool species out there.
All right. I can definitely agree with you on that one. That's why we're doing this today, trying to share some of that amazing variety of life on the planet, the weird and the wonderful.
True.
And of course, the challenges and the good news conservation story. So Imogen, thank you so much for joining us on today. International Day for Biodiversity. It's great to hear a little bit of the work you're doing. Wildly jealous that now I know the number is 4 wild snow leopards. That seems excessive, but fine, whatever.
It is.
All right, very cool. Well, Imogen, it's always great to steal a little bit of your time. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And maybe one more just to wrap us up today. How can we follow your work? How can people follow what you're up to?
The easiest way to find me is probably on Twitter or Instagram. My Twitter handle is biologist IMO. It's biologist Imogene on Instagram. But if all of that is confusing, you can just find me on biologistimogene.com. There's links to all of my social handles, as well as the research I'm doing, as well as resources for you if you're interested in wildlife.
Perfect. Well, Imogen, enjoy the rest of your night, and hopefully it won't be too long before we chat again.
Yeah, we'll see you guys online over the weekend. See ya.
All right. Thanks, Imogen.
Bye.